Good morning to everybody from your hosts, Ty Melbourne, along with our co-hosts, Ty Dubai and Ty Islamabad. Now more than ever before in our history, we are faced with many challenges: cultural, moral, economic, health, and planetary. The need for international and cultural understanding, inclusion, inspiration, and unity, and the need for prevailing peace has never been greater.
And here's a picture of many of the world's leaders attending the Belt and Road Forum, the first Belt and Road Forum organized by Chinese President Xi Jinping in May 2017. BRI is a shorthand for two grand schemes conceived by China's President Xi Jinping. One of them is, of course, a Silk Road economic belt, which is the land route, is the so-called Maritime Silk Road, which consists of a network of ports and other coastal infrastructure. It is an ambitious attempt to integrate the European landmass economically and politically, with clearly some strategic consequences. So economic integration, which of course is one of the foundational principles of globalization also, is so One Belt, One Road, or the BRI initiative, is designed to integrate these economies with that of China. It is also a way of finding a more profitable use for China's vast foreign exchange reserves. And China, as we know, is still sitting on nearly $3 trillion US in foreign currency reserves. So this is also one way to look for more profitable, more efficient ways of utilizing China's foreign currency reserves. A third economic objective is to facilitate the restructuring of China's economy by deploying excess capacity in other countries. My favorite is this quote from Scott Kennedy, an American scholar, who calls it, he said, Belt and Road Initiative is like a Christmas tree. You can hang a lot of policy goals on it. So far, China is believed to have invested nearly $450 billion in various projects around the world. Much of it is in loans. Some of it is investments by Chinese state-owned companies, but many of the investments also are funded by loans from China's two policy banks, China Development Bank and the Exim Bank. So a lot of it is, in fact, loans. China's own economy also, of course, has taken a major hit during the pandemic. China's growth rate collapsed because of the economic sort of fallout from the pandemic. That they're going to focus on health, they're going to focus on agriculture, they're going to focus on services, project management services, but many of the big projects are probably not likely to be promoted by the Chinese authorities. Globalization, it has broadened our horizon. We have learned new things. There have been new ideas, new technologies that have proliferated. In fact, product life cycles have become much shorter, largely because of how new technologies have moved so rapidly. Our contemporary experience echoes what happened during the Silk Roads in the heydays.
It's actually an equation. Supply meets demand. And basically, wherever there is a demand and something moves to supply, meet that demand, the supply side, then they create a route to doing it. It's about talking about flow of goods, and it's about leading to flow of culture also, because when people move, they also interact with the people. Because China in the Mao era, it developed its mines and later on went on to develop the downstream value threads, and it had a huge appetite for technology. And at one point in the late 80s, they were digesting like 5,000 joint ventures and technology agreements per year. And then comes Deng Xiaoping and the rise of China's market economy, and China becoming the factory of the world. Because China had technology, it had large corporations which would come out and be able to deliver infrastructure projects. It had the cash to fund them, and then it had the goods to sell on those things, on those infrastructure, those projects, and in those markets. So China is developing ports around the world, it's doing, and then it is also trying to cope up with threats of interventions. India itself has its own ambitious plan for its own internal Silk Road. which is called Sagarmala network. And Sagarmala is also a very intelligent way of linking all the coastal industrial towns with the interior of India. The present route is here, which we were already constructing. And now here is the new route, the western route going all the way to Gwadar. And in between will be some interlinks here. This route is basically a supply line to China, as well as supply lines from China, linking China to the Indian Ocean, where China has partnered in development of the Gwadar port. And here is a map of manufacturing clusters in Pakistan. When you have good roads, they speed up communication, the logistics is good, bring down the cost of production. So we are all benefiting from these roads already, but as we link up with China, we'll see some more economic activity. We already have developed enough power to foster our industrial growth. We are now surplus in electricity at this moment, and special economic zones leading to development of local regions, and active trade route to Middle East, and collaboration with China and other countries for trade.
1984, where diplomatic relations started to begin with China. China slowly coming on the map. We had about a 250 million trade with China, and of course we registered about 2.5 billion US dollars in bilateral trade. So that's a very strong growth for Dubai at that time and the 1990s. Now Dubai was looking at China at the same time and looking at the business community. It's a huge tsunami of business, manufacturing and products. So in turn, they thought about this and they thought, let's embrace this change. Let's get closer to China.
For a long time, China had already been buying oil and gas from UAE and from Saudi Arabia and the rest of the region. So China was very reliant on this region to fuel its manufacturing and export-led infrastructure development growth model. So for a long time, Dubai's leaders were focusing on building Dubai up as a hub in the Gulf, as a hub in the GCC, Africa, MENASA region. And some of that investment was now starting to pay off. By 2015, both countries took the next level in their relationship. They launched a investment fund, the Belt and Road Fund, which was managed by the sovereign funds of both countries. So within 4 years, between about 2015 and 2019, the number of Chinese tourists to Dubai doubled to 800,000, and the number of Chinese living in Dubai increased to between 180 and 200,000. So that's representing about 8 or 9% of the population. A lot of these companies who have projects in the Gulf region or have it in the MENA region, they're setting up their MENA headquarters in Dubai, and they're using it to manage it, or they're even setting up a treasury or a finance function as well. The big 4 Chinese banks are also in Dubai International Financial Center, and one of these banks is approved as an RMB clearing center, which effectively makes Dubai the second offshore clearing center, renminbi clearing center in the Middle East. In 2019, the bilateral trade was roughly 42 billion. Of that 42 billion, 90% of it was China exporting to Dubai, and of that 90%, about 65 to 70% of that is re-exported. So a lot of Chinese exports to the Middle East, North Africa region actually goes through Jebel Ali port. Post-corona, China might level out these investments and focus on more technology-based investments, new infrastructure, things like electric charging networks, drone security networks, 5G networks. And the Belt and Road is a very broad concept. It can include anything from these infrastructure projects to private sector companies coming and investing in Dubai and localizing for the Arab market.